All right, let's just dive right into this explainer and uncover a fascinating and honestly somewhat surprising truth about wealth. We tend to think that doing well with money is all about how smart you are, how perfectly you can build a spreadsheet, or what kind of prestigious degree you hold. But it turns out, financial success actually has surprisingly little to do with your raw intelligence and absolutely everything to do with your behavior.
You know, there is a story that brilliantly captures the ultimate paradox of finance. Picture two completely different people. First, you have Ronald Reed, a rural janitor who patiently, quietly saved in blue-chip stocks over his life. Then, you have Richard Fuscone, a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive. You would automatically assume Fuscone is the one who retired incredibly wealthy, right? Well, in 2014, Reed passed away leaving a staggering $8 million fortune to charity and his stepkids. Meanwhile, Fuscone was completely crushed by the 2008 financial crisis and ended up standing before a bankruptcy judge penniless. I mean, you would literally never see a janitor perform a better surgery than a Harvard-trained doctor. But that exact dynamic happens all the time in investing.
So, let's get into Section 1, Behavior over Financial Math.
We're all kind of wired to treat money like it's a hard science, totally driven by concrete formulas and data. We get told to save exactly 10% of our income and build a 6-month emergency fund. But the crucial point here is that knowing what to do mathematically tells you absolutely nothing about what actually happens in your head when you try to do it. A perfect formula simply can't account for the sheer panic you feel when your retirement portfolio drops 30%, or the extreme, blinding greed that kicks in when your neighbor suddenly gets rich on a wildly risky bet. It is a soft skill.
Moving right along to Section 2, Why No One is Crazy.
Let's be honest, people do some completely baffling things with their money. But to truly understand financial behavior, we first have to build a little empathy and recognize that nobody is actually crazy. Every single person goes through life firmly anchored to a set of views about money, shaped entirely by the dumb luck of when and where they were born. An Australian who hasn't seen a recession in 30 years views the economy completely differently than an American who had to live through the devastation of 2008. We all like to think we know how the world works, but realistically, we've only experienced a microscopic sliver of it.
Think about the visual gap in these generational experiences. It is absolutely striking. If you were born in 1970, the S&P 500 shot up nearly tenfold during your teens and 20s. You experienced massive, relentless stock gains. But what if you were born in 1950? The market went literally nowhere during those exact same formative years. These two groups are going to go through their entire lives with fundamentally opposite gut feelings about whether the stock market is a magical wealth-generating machine or just a stagnant trap.
And it's the exact same story when we look at inflation. Someone born in 1960 saw prices absolutely skyrocket, more than threefold during their 20s. Compare that to a millennial born in 1990, where inflation has basically been a flat line for their entire conscious life until very recently. You can instantly see why these two generations will never, ever agree on financial risks. It isn't an intelligence gap we're looking at, it is purely an experience gap.
Now, this brings us to a somewhat controversial question. Why do the lowest income households in the US spend over $400 a year on lottery tickets? Statistically speaking, 40% of Americans cannot comfortably come up with $400 in an emergency. So if you can't afford a basic emergency, blowing that exact same amount on lotto tickets seems totally insane to most of us. But let's take a beat and look at the hidden narrative that makes this choice perfectly rational to the buyer in that specific moment.
When you look at it through the lens of their day-to-day reality, they aren't buying a spreadsheet probability. They're essentially saying, hey, we live paycheck to paycheck, vacations are out of the question, and college tuition for our kids feels utterly impossible. Buying this ticket is literally the only time we can hold a real, tangible dream of getting the good stuff that wealthy people already take for granted. They aren't making a mathematical error. They are purchasing a feeling. They're buying a dream. You don't have to agree with it to understand that they aren't crazy.
Plus, we really need to cut ourselves some slack for our financial mistakes. Why? Because the entire modern foundation of saving and retiring is practically an infant concept. Before the 1940s, the general expectation was just that you worked until you died. The 401k? That wasn't even invented until 1978, and the Roth IRA didn't arrive on the scene until 1998. We are essentially trying to navigate a brand new, highly complex financial ecosystem with ancient hunter-gatherer brains. So yeah, we are all just winging it.
Which brings us to Section 3, the siblings, luck and risk.
Once we truly internalize that we're all just products of our own unique environments, we have to introduce two unseen, massively powerful forces that humble every single one of us: luck and risk. As Professor Scott Galloway famously says, nothing is as good or as bad as it seems. This quote is such a vital anchor when judging anyone's financial success or failure, including your own. You're playing a game with 7 billion other people, and the accidental impact of actions completely outside your control is often vastly more consequential than your own conscious decisions.
Let's actually mathematically narrow down Bill Gates' incredible luck as a teenager to truly grasp this concept. Picture this. In 1968, there were roughly 303 million high schoolers globally. About 18 million of them lived in the US. Narrow that down to 100,000 in the Seattle area, and exactly 300 of them attended Lakeside School. Lakeside was uniquely funded by a mother's club that had the wild foresight to buy a real-time computer terminal at a time when even most universities didn't have them. Bill Gates just happened to be one of those literal 1 in a million students. Yes, he was brilliant. Yes, he worked incredibly hard, but he undeniably had a massive 1 in a million head start.
But here's the kicker. Risk is really just luck's tragic doppelganger. See, Gates had a best friend at Lakeside named Kent Evans. According to Gates himself, Evans was the smartest kid in the class, shared Gates' fierce business ambition, and the two were actually planning their future tech empires together. He very well could have been a founding partner of Microsoft. But tragically, Kent Evans died in a mountaineering accident before ever graduating high school. The odds of being killed on a mountain in high school are also roughly 1 in a million. Gates and Evans experienced the exact same staggering magnitude of chance. It was just pushed in completely opposite directions.
And that right there is exactly why judging success is so incredibly difficult. When we evaluate modern billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg, who turned down Yahoo's massive billion-dollar buyout offer early on, or historical titans like Cornelius Vanderbilt, who built an empire while openly flouting the laws of his time, the line between an inspiringly bold visionary and a foolishly reckless outlaw is practically invisible. It is just so easy to praise a reckless decision that happened to get lucky and condemn a brilliant decision that simply fell victim to risk. Definitely keep that in mind the next time you're tempted to just copy a billionaire's portfolio.
All right, Section 4. The danger of never enough.
This brings us to the ultimate behavioral trap for those who actually do manage to navigate luck and risk to attain immense wealth. There's this great story about a party hosted by a billionaire hedge fund manager. The author Joseph Heller was there, and someone pointed out that the host made more money in a single day than Heller's wildly popular novel Catch-22 had earned over its entire history. Heller just smiled and replied, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." Heller nailed it. He identified the single most elusive, powerful financial skill, knowing when the goalpost just needs to stop moving.
On the flip side, a man named Rajat Gupta perfectly embodies the absolute dark side of ambition when it lacks that enough point. Gupta's story actually starts as this incredible triumph. He was orphaned as a teenager in the slums of Calcutta, yet he beat all the odds to become the CEO of McKinsey. He partnered with Bill Gates on global philanthropy. He sat on the board of directors for 5 huge public companies, including Goldman Sachs. He had attained the absolute undeniable peak of corporate respect and success.
By 2008, his net worth was a staggering $100 million. Let's just put that number into perspective for a second. With a standard 5% return, $100 million generates nearly $600 an hour, 24 hours a day, purely in interest. He had secured a level of generational wealth that allowed him to do quite literally anything he wanted for the rest of his life.
But somehow, $100 million simply wasn't enough. Why? Why on earth risk it all for just a little bit more? Well, because Gupta was sitting on the Goldman Sachs board, his everyday peers were literal billionaires. Compared to them, he actually felt lacking. He wanted to be in that elite billionaire circle so badly, and that unquenchable desire prompted one of the most devastating behavioral failures in modern business history.
During the 2008 financial crisis, Gupta learned, in his highly confidential capacity as a board member, that Warren Buffett was about to inject $5 billion to save Goldman Sachs. This was massive, market-moving information, and Gupta leaked the secret to a hedge fund manager friend, resulting in $17 million in illegal insider trading profits. He traded his pristine reputation, his incredible legacy, and his absolute freedom, ultimately going to federal prison. All just to marginally increase a fortune he already couldn't possibly spend. He had zero sense of enough.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to really challenge how you view your own financial decisions moving forward. We spend so much time obsessing over interest rates, analyzing stock charts, and perfecting the precise math of our investments. But given that our actual success hinges so deeply on our hidden psychological biases, our respect for blind luck and random risk, and our fundamental ability to know when we finally have enough, are you judging your financial future by math or by your behavior?
Thank you so much for exploring this with me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.